House of David episode 3 is just dropped. There's a lot of interesting things here when it comes to this episode. Now, we talked about episodes 1 and 2 in our overviews. Episode 1 being way more of an action adventure fight war movie type deal, and then episode 2 being a lot more relational. Well, in episode 3 we're kind of continuing on with that, with a little bit of action adventure kind of added in here. And as you're seeing here at the beginning of the episode, we're gonna see a lot of this throughout. As we ended episode 2, you saw that, well, there was some drama. There's a love triangle between Merab and Michal and David. Of course, David and Michal love each other, but Merab in the previous episode kind of asked if she could marry David instead to her father. And he thought this was a great idea as a political kind of, move for them and the nation of Israel. And so, it kind of worked out for her that is how he wanted it to be, which in scripture is exactly what we see. We see Merab as she is the one that is chosen to marry David. There's some other stuff that happens later, but we'll get there. Now, Merab being kind of a sneaky snake here is not in scripture, but of course, adding to the drama here always makes a lot of sense for a TV show like this. Now, so far in season 2 overall, it's been pretty good about biblical accuracy. Episode 3 basically has nothing biblical in it pretty much at all. I can't really tell any location here where there's basically anything from scripture, because they're trying to fill in more time than they want to go over within the scripture itself. The scripture does last several years, and there's a lot of different things that happen. However, there's certain things that they have to do within this season, right? They have to make David kind of transform from this poet kid who killed the giant into a warrior, right? And they have to make him a pretty darn strong warrior at that. We know that the end of this season, there's going to be most likely David being banished. And so he has to be that warrior already that Saul is really jealous of. And so we're starting to see some movements toward that here in episode 3, but not anything that's like crazy quite yet, and not anything that's directly from scripture. There's a lot of romance and relational stuff that happens within this episode overall. So not only between the love triangle, which is kind of the main romance, right, between David, Michal, and Merab, but we also have 2 other romances, maybe 3 other romances going on at the same time. We've got, of course, Saul and Ahinoam, who are kind of dealing with their own relationship stuff. Then we've also got Eshbal returning, obviously, in episode 2, but continuing that kind of mystery of where was he? What's happened with him? Why has he changed so much? That kind of continues on. He has sort of a romantic continuation here as well, which is a continuation from a storyline from season 1. The reason that he got banished in the first place is because he defiled Dinah, who is the daughter of the tribe of Dan's leader, essentially. The tribe of Dan's chief. And so now he's got to kind of continue on that storyline, Eshbal does. And then we have Jonathan as well, who has another sort of relational moment with Sarah, who we saw back in episode 2 as well, after he was getting healed by the healer, and her name was Sarah, and then she kind of, was into him a little bit. So lots and lots and lots of romance, much more romance than I expected in a show like this. Of course, the Bible is filled with romance moments and relationships and marriages and, all this different type of stuff. I totally understand that. There's a lot of extracurricular stuff here, though, from Eshbal and Jonathan and some of this other stuff that's going on with Ahinoam. We don't really know much about her at all, but obviously she did the whole witch stuff back in season 1. And then now she's dealing more with relational stuff and the consequences of her actions back then, which is what she's dealing with now. I don't think Saul, for example, is like going to kill Ahinoam or like divorce her or something like that. I don't think that's going to happen. That would be quite crazy. But obviously their relationship is being affected by what she has done in the past. While Saul is kind of done with his the madness that he had back in season 1, in the beginning of season 2, he's still there, and he's still Saul, and he's still paranoid, and he's still dealing with these things in just a different way. He's just not overcome by this spirit that's kind of, attacking him all the time. So anyway, really interesting episode overall. I'll just say that there's really not any scripture whatsoever. One thing that I'll show you a quick little glimpse of is David becoming that warrior. We see him kind of go through this training arc. And one thing that I do love about House of David is they're not really giving you a tight timeline of exactly when and where and how things are happening. Unlike The Chosen often will say, hey, a month ago we did this, or that was yesterday, or 2 weeks ago we did this, right? And then they'll give you little timestamps on the bottom of the screen to tell you like exactly when in the timeline you are for The Chosen. The problem with that is that it's really easy to get wrong. So in The Chosen, the timeline is extremely messed up, right? And what I wish they would have done in The Chosen is been a little bit more vague in terms of the timeline so that we can infer it by the time of year or the festivals or the different things that are happening there a little bit better. In House of David, I feel like it's a lot more vague. The only real time frame that we've gotten is the very beginning of the show. And then at the beginning of this season, we get a 1 year later sort of flash forward or flash backward. And so that was a big thing here. But for David, of course, he's going to need time. And so this is showing the passage of time with him and Jonathan. Not only the two of them becoming really close friends, but look at how much they're training together, right? Of course, we're kind of flashing over to Achish, but we also go to these different areas that David and Jonathan are as David is learning how to become that warrior, right? And so we see that kind of go throughout all these different places. They're training all the time. They're getting better and better and better. And you see as David really is getting the hang of it. At first, Jonathan is just destroying him in these training sessions, but then he goes from that to being able to hold his own and becoming more and more of that warrior. And so David is becoming, stronger in that. In the battle that we saw during the war at the beginning of this season, he really didn't take anybody out. He wasn't able to really fight anybody other than Goliath because God gave him the strength to do so. But in his body, in his muscle memory, and who he is, he really does not have the strength to become this mighty warrior quite yet. He really needs to go through that training and be prepared for what is going to happen there. Yet, Saul has put him in charge of 1,000 men because it makes a good political move for Saul. And he's also going to marry one of his daughters, obviously. So the furthering of who David is, I think, is a really interesting piece of this episode. And of course, it just speaks to my heart as the dude, someone who I would run around all the time as a kid with swords and, whenever I could, bows and arrows, right? And I love that piece of David that is the warrior king, that heart from him. And the fact that he is all of a poet and a warrior and a king, I think is what really makes this, what it is. And so, I think we're going to see a lot more of that, obviously. I won't spoil it, but they go on a large kind of adventure in the second half of this episode, and that's a large part of what kind of culminates into everything. Also, there's a lot of drama between the love triangle there and how that all comes together. And so all of that to say, I do think it's a pretty good mix of action and relationship within this episode, but the romance is pretty heavy. There's no make out scenes or anything like that. Not like we saw in season one, the season one finale, but there's definitely a bunch of tension building up, a bunch of romantic tension between a bunch of different characters that are all going to either turn out really well or turn out really bad. Who knows? And if you've read the scripture, you kind of know where it's going with the love triangle there with Merab and Michal and David, which should be quite interesting to see how that goes overall. This episode, though, just as an episode of a show, I think is pretty good. I would say not a ton happened that we really cared about too much. David improves a little bit. There's this love stuff that happens. And then the second half, there's this action adventure sort of adventure that they go on. And so I would probably rate this episode probably a 7 out of 10. Yeah, probably like a 7 out of 10. Not that super interesting. There's some good stuff that happens. I think it looks really great. I think there are some key moments for David specifically, key growth moments throughout this episode. And then there are some interesting kind of setups for future episodes. And so, yeah, that's where I would land this one, about a 7 out of 10 for me. I do think it's great. I do think the show as a whole it does feel a little bit better in season 2 than it did in season 1. And the AI is not as distracting as in the first 2 episodes either. I didn't realize or recognize any like specific points where I was like, that's definitely AI. Like I did see them, of course, but it's not as distracting as it was in the other shots that we looked at in episodes 1 and 2. And so if you can use AI like that, where it just is seamlessly integrated into the show and it's not a distraction, I think that is a really good way to use it. And of course, saves them a lot of money, makes it a lot faster to make as well. And so that is fine with me there. Yeah, let me know your thoughts about House of David episode 3. Of course, we'll go into our deep dives right after this. I'm going to wait a little bit on the deep dives to go through the season. I'm going to do all of my reviews first of the episodes, give you a rating for them. And then after that, we'll go into a lot of different things in our deep dives, maybe not episode by episode, but we will go through the entire season and kind of pick out all the points that I really, really want to talk about between the episodes and the historical, cultural things that all need to be talked about within the season as a whole. There's a lot that's going to be talked about. This will probably take us through this year into next year. And so hold on to all of that. We'll talk about all of it as it comes. Lots of information to come, lots of not only information, but also new shows and different things here on the channel. So make sure you're subscribed. If you love biblical media and you want to talk more about it, you want to learn more about it, there's a lot more to come here. And we'll talk about it then. So anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Let me hear your rating for House of David episode 3, season 2, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.